Aldrich returned to Avalon beneath a sky the color of wet iron, riding a dying horse along the western cliffs while gulls screamed overhead and waves hammered the rocks below like war drums from another age, and not a single soul recognized the man beneath the torn traveler's cloak because the last time the kingdom had seen him he had been 17 years old, broad-shouldered and reckless, the favored son of House Vale, heir to one of the oldest bloodlines in the realm, but the man crossing the gate now looked closer to 40 despite being only 28, with silver threaded through dark hair, a jagged burn mark climbing the left side of his neck, and eyes so pale they unsettled anyone who met them for longer than a heartbeat, and as he entered the capital city of Caer Iden he listened quietly to the sounds he had once missed during exile, merchants shouting over fish prices, wagon wheels rattling over uneven stone, children weaving through crowds with stolen fruit tucked into their sleeves, priests chanting outside temple gates while smoke from cedar incense drifted into the streets, and for the first time in 11 years Aldrich understood that hatred could survive longer than love because every memory he carried of Avalon had remained sharp enough to wound him even after oceans, prisons, deserts, and battlefields had tried to erase the boy he used to be. Nobody greeted him at the gates because everyone believed he had died long ago in the Blackwater Rebellion beside his disgraced father, and Aldrich preferred it that way, for dead men moved unnoticed while living nobles drew knives the moment politics demanded blood. He guided the exhausted horse toward the lower districts where taverns leaned drunkenly against each other and rainwater carried filth through narrow gutters, and there he found an old and called the hollow lantern still standing beneath faded blue paint, though smaller than he remembered, and when he entered the common room conversations briefly softened as strangers examined him with suspicion before returning to their drinks. The innkeeper, a gray-bearded man polishing cups behind the counter, squinted at Aldrich for several silent seconds before his face drained of color. "No," the old man whispered. "No, that's impossible." Aldrich removed his gloves slowly. "Good to see you too, Bram." The cup slipped from Bram's hands and shattered on the floor. "God's alive," he muttered, stepping backward. "They said you burned with the rest." "Many things burned," Aldrich replied. "I didn't." Bram hurried around the counter and embraced him awkwardly, still stunned, and Aldrich endured it without returning the gesture because physical affection had become foreign after years among mercenaries and sorcerers who solved disagreements with blades instead of words. Bram pulled away and studied him carefully. "You look terrible." "I've looked worse." "You picked the wrong time to return. The city's rotten. Nobles murdering each other in shadows while King Edric drinks himself blind. Taxes doubled this winter. Half the harbor starving." Aldrich glanced toward the rain-streaked window. "And House Vale?" Bram hesitated too long. "Gone. Lands seized years ago. Your family estate belongs to Duke Merrick now." Aldrich showed no visible reaction, but the wooden counter beneath his hand cracked softly from the pressure of his fingers. Bram noticed and swallowed hard. "Listen to me carefully," the innkeeper said in a lower voice. "If anyone discovers who you are, the Duke will have you killed before sunrise." Aldrich finally smiled, though it carried no warmth. Then sunrise may disappoint him. That night he rented the smallest room in the inn and slept for less than an hour before waking instinctively to the sound of footsteps outside his door, and the moment the handle turned he rolled from the bed as a crossbow bolt struck the mattress where his throat had been seconds earlier. Then the door burst inward and three masked men rushed inside with curved knives glinting in candlelight, but Aldrich moved with terrifying calm, catching the first attacker's wrist and snapping it backward with a wet crack before driving the man headfirst into the wall hard enough to cave in plaster. Then he seized the fallen crossbow and fired point-blank into the second assassin's chest while the third lunged wildly only for Aldrich to whisper a phrase in an ancient tongue that made every candle in the room explode outward in blue fire, and the assassin froze in horror as invisible pressure crushed him against the ceiling beams until blood streamed from his nose and ears. Silence returned except for the creaking of the inn in the storm. Aldrich stood motionless in the darkened room while the surviving assassin writhed on the floor clutching the bolt buried in his lungs. "Who sent you?" Aldrich asked. The man spat blood and laughed weakly. "Everyone wants you dead." Aldrich crouched beside him. "That wasn't the question." "Duke Merrick," the assassin whispered. "Reward for your head." Aldrich nodded once, then rose and snapped the man's neck cleanly before the confession could travel beyond the room. Downstairs Bram stared at the corpses with trembling hands while Aldrich cleaned blood from his knuckles using a torn curtain. "You used magic," Bram said quietly. Real magic. Yes. I thought the mages of Avalon were all dead. Aldrich looked toward the storm outside. Most are. Before dawn he left the inn alone and walked uphill through the sleeping city toward the royal district where marble towers rose above the fog like pale spears, and as bells rang in distant temples he stopped before the gates of House Vale's former estate, now occupied by Duke Garin Marek, the man responsible for betraying Aldrich's father during the rebellion 11 years earlier, and though guards stood watch along the walls none recognized the traveler approaching through the rain until Aldrich spoke calmly. Tell your master Aldrich Vale has returned. The guards laughed openly. One even wiped tears from his eyes. Aldrich Vale, the captain mocked. Why not claim to be the Moon Emperor while you're at it? Aldrich raised one hand and the iron gate behind them twisted inward with a scream of tortured metal before exploding off its hinges and crashing into the courtyard fountain. The laughter died instantly. Now, Aldrich said softly, tell your master. Within minutes the estate erupted into chaos as servants fled indoors and soldiers formed defensive lines across the courtyard, but Aldrich continued walking forward without urgency while rain hissed against invisible heat radiating from his body. Duke Marek emerged onto the balcony above in crimson robes trimmed with gold fur, older now but still carrying the arrogance that power granted cowards. Who are you? The Duke demanded. Aldrich removed his hood. Several older servants gasped. Marek's expression faltered for one brief moment before hardening again. Impossible. You said that at my father's execution too, Aldrich replied. Just before you signed the order. Marek recovered quickly. You should have stayed dead. You stole my house. Your family committed treason. My family trusted the wrong allies. Marek sneered down at him. And what now? You think one half-starved exile can challenge the crown? Aldrich glanced around at the armed soldiers surrounding him. No, he said. I think the crown has grown weak. Then he spoke another phrase in the ancient language, and every torch in the courtyard extinguished at once while black clouds swirled overhead unnaturally fast, swallowing the dawn itself, and fear spread through the guards because Avalon had not seen true arcane power in generations. Lightning struck the courtyard fountain hard enough to shatter stone into fragments. Horses screamed inside the stables. Windows burst outward across the estate. Aldrich's voice cut through the chaos with icy clarity. Kneel. Some guards did immediately. Others hesitated until the paving stones beneath their feet cracked open with blue light pouring through the fractures like molten stars. One by one they dropped their weapons. Duke Marek backed away from the balcony rail, pale beneath his beard. You dare threaten a royal duke, he shouted. No, Aldrich answered. I dare far worse. By midday the entire capital knew the dead son of House Vale had returned wielding forbidden magic, and whispers spread through markets and taverns faster than plague. Some called him a demon. Others claimed Avalon's ancient bloodlines had awakened again. The royal court reacted with panic disguised as diplomacy, which was why Aldrich received an official summons to the palace before sunset instead of another assassination attempt. He arrived wearing plain black clothing borrowed from Bram's late son, carrying no weapon visible to the eye, though the palace guards still watched him like men escorting a caged beast. The throne hall glittered with gold pillars and stained glass, crowded with nobles whose jeweled silks contrasted sharply against Aldrich's scarred appearance, and as he crossed the chamber murmurs followed him like insects. King Edric sat slumped upon the throne with wine heavy in his eyes, far weaker than the ruler Aldrich remembered from childhood. Beside the throne stood Princess Lyessa, the king's daughter, dressed in silver armor beneath a ceremonial cloak because unlike most nobles she commanded soldiers personally and had earned loyalty through competence rather than birth. Her gaze fixed on Aldrich with open curiosity instead of fear. You survived, she said quietly. Barely, Aldrich replied. Duke Marek stepped forward immediately. Your Majesty, this man practices outlawed sorcery and attacked my estate without provocation. Aldrich looked at him. You sent killers to my room before dawn. Marek opened his mouth but Princess Lyessa interrupted coldly. Did you? The Duke hesitated. That hesitation alone exposed enough truth for half the court. King Edric rubbed his temples irritably. Enough. Avalon has no need for old feuds. Aldrich studied the king for several seconds before speaking. You executed my father without trial. Your father marched soldiers against the throne. Because your advisors poisoned your mind against loyal houses. Tension tightened across the chamber. Several guards shifted uneasily. Then the king surprised everyone by laughing bitterly. Perhaps they did, Edric muttered. Half the vipers around me certainly would. Duke Merrick's face darkened. The king leaned forward. You possess power Avalon cannot ignore, Aldrich Vale. Which leaves us with two choices. We kill you now and pray your followers never rise in revenge, or we bind your loyalty to the crown. Aldrich's eyes narrowed slightly. How? Princess Lyessa answered before her father could. Marriage. Silence hit the throne hall like a hammer blow. Even the servants stopped moving. Aldrich stared at her without expression while nobles exchanged shocked whispers. Lyessa herself looked furious beneath her composed exterior, clearly learning of this arrangement at the same moment as everyone else. King Edric spread his hands lazily. A union between the royal line and House Vale restores legitimacy, ends blood feuds, and gives the realm stability. You want to chain me, Aldrich said. I want the kingdom to survive winter, the king replied. Princess Lyessa stepped closer, voice low and sharp. I will not marry a stranger dragged from exile. Nor I a princess used as bait, Aldrich answered immediately. For the first time something almost amused flickered across her face. Duke Merrick sensed danger in the conversation, shifting away from him and quickly spoke. Your Majesty, this is madness. The man is unstable. Aldrich turned his head slowly toward the Duke. Every candle near Merrick dimmed at once. Continue, Aldrich invited softly. Merrick fell silent. By midnight. The marriage decree had been signed despite objections from nearly everyone involved, and Aldrich found himself escorted through endless palace corridors toward chambers once reserved for foreign kings. Lyessa walked beside him in rigid silence until the guards disappeared beyond earshot. Then she stopped abruptly. Understand something clearly, she said. I agreed because refusing would trigger civil war. Not because I trust you. Aldrich looked out through the tall windows at rain sweeping across the city below. Wise decision. You speak like a man expecting betrayal. Experience teaches patterns. And what exactly did exile suffer while he survived? You know what your problem is? She said softly. Several thousand possibilities come to mind. You think being needed is the same thing as being loved. The word struck harder than any blade. Aldrich's expression fractured briefly with something painfully human. Lyessa, she stepped forward again until only inches separated them. You spent your entire life earning pain because you thought sacrifice made you worthy of staying. He looked at her like a man standing too close to sunlight after years underground. Then the root beneath them split apart. The Devourer King crashed down through the well above them, smashing through silver branches in pursuit. Aldrich reacted instantly, pulling Lyessa back as colossal claws tore across the root where they had stood moments earlier. The Titan's burning eyes locked onto them through drifting ruins. The seal weakens, it thundered. Above the battlefield, the sphere containing Selim flickered dangerously. The light sustaining the reforming gate was failing. The keeper roared in warning. Aldrich stared upward toward his brother's fading light and finally closed his eyes briefly. Decision settled across his face with terrible certainty. When he opened them again, silver fire burned brighter around him than ever before. Lyessa saw it immediately. No, he touched her face gently, almost uncertainly, as though memorizing something fragile. You asked me once what exile taught me. Her throat tightened. Aldrich, it taught me that surviving isn't the same as living. The Devourer King surged toward them again. Aldrich stepped forward into rising silver flames while the well itself trembled around him. And loving something, he said quietly, eyes never leaving hers, means protecting it even when it breaks you. Then he turned toward the collapsing seal above. And the magic inside him began to awaken completely. Silver fire engulfed Aldrich so intensely that the root beneath his feet began crystallizing into translucent light, and the moment his power awakened fully, the entire well reacted like a living thing recognizing one of its own. Endless roots pulsed outward through the void. The silver sphere containing Selim blazed brighter for one brief heartbeat. Even the Devourer King hesitated as ancient symbols spread across Aldrich's skin, no longer merely glowing beneath the flesh but emerging outward in burning streams that wrapped around him like living script. Lyessa felt the force of it pushing against her chest. This was not human magic anymore. This was the raw pulse of the well itself flowing through a mortal body never meant to contain it fully. Aldrich, she whispered, fear finally overtaking anger. He looked back at her one last time. His pale eyes no longer reflected the silver flames around him. They had become the flames. Stay alive, he said softly. I'm getting very tired of hearing men say that before doing something stupid. To her astonishment, he smiled. Not the restrained ghost of amusement she had seen before, but something warm and painfully genuine. Then perhaps I'll survive out of spite. The Devourer King roared and lunged downward through the roots toward them. Aldrich rose to meet it. The well exploded around him. He moved not like a man leaping but like light itself tearing upward through darkness. Silver fire streamed behind him in enormous wings as he collided head-on with the Titan's descending claws. The impact shattered roots across the void. Lyessa was thrown backward along the branch while storms of crystal fragments spiraled around the battling figures above. The Devourer King struck again and again with colossal force capable of destroying mountains, but Aldrich met every blow in bursts of silver radiance that burned holes through the Titan's crimson armor. For the first time since entering Avalon, the Devourer began retreating under pressure. Yet the cost showed immediately. Each strike caused cracks of crimson corruption to spread further across Aldrich's body. The hunger inside him awakened with every use of the well's power. The Keeper's voice rolled through the void. The balance breaks. Seraphine, still battling barrows across the shattered remains of the platform far above, looked toward the rising clash between Aldrich and the Devourer King. What balance? The Keeper's massive eyes followed Aldrich. He burns both zeal and hunger together. Lyessa understood first. The more power he uses, the closer he becomes to the Devourer itself. Above them Aldrich drove the Titan backward through 3 enormous roots in an explosion of silver fire. The Devourer King roared in genuine pain now. Entire sections of its body dissolved beneath the assault. Yet crimson darkness simultaneously spread through Aldrich's flames. The well trembled violently around both of them as though unable to endure the conflict inside his soul. Then the Devourer laughed. Even wounded, even burning, it laughed. You feel it now, the Titan whispered through the chaos. The hunger beneath every living thing. Aldrich unleashed another devastating blast of silver fire that tore off one of the creature's massive arms. I feel your fear. The Devourer's severed limb dissolved into crimson storms, instantly reforming elsewhere along its body. You cannot destroy what mortals carry already. Images erupted around them across the well's roots. Wars. Betrayals. Kings slaughtering kingdoms for power. Parents abandoning children. Cities burning long before the breach ever opened. I am not invasion, the Devourer thundered. I am appetite. Aldrich faltered for the first time. Only slightly. But enough. The Titan seized him in both colossal hands and hurled him downward through the roots hard enough to rupture entire sections of the well. Lyessa screamed his name as he crashed onto the branch below her in a storm of shattered crystal. He tried to rise immediately, but blood poured from his mouth, now glowing silver and crimson together. The corruption spreading through him accelerated visibly. The Devourer descended slowly through the void above like an executioner. You understand me now, it said almost gently. Every world eventually feeds its strongest to its weakest. Aldrich forced himself upright again despite trembling limbs. No, you deny your own nature? I deny yours. Teach you besides threats and dark magic? He considered the question longer than she expected. That mercy and weakness are often mistaken for the same thing. Lyessa folded her arms. You sound tired. Aldrich almost answered honestly, which surprised him enough to keep silent instead. The princess studied his face carefully now that court audiences no longer surrounded them. "How many people have you killed?" she asked. "Enough to know the number stops mattering." "That isn't an answer. It's the only one I have." Before she could press further, screams erupted somewhere deeper within the palace, followed by the clash of steel, and both of them reacted instantly. Lyessa drew a hidden dagger from her sleeve while Aldrich's eyes sharpened dangerously. Soldiers came running around the corridor corner shouting about intruders in the eastern wing. Aldrich moved first, striding toward the chaos with Lyessa beside him despite guards begging them to retreat, and when they reached the eastern gallery they found corpses littering the marble floor alongside shattered windows where black-clad assassins poured into the palace using grappling hooks from rooftops above. One attacker rushed Lyessa with twin blades only for her to pivot sideways and drive her dagger cleanly beneath his jaw before kicking the body away. Aldrich lifted one hand and invisible force hurled 3 assassins through stained glass windows simultaneously. More kept coming. "These aren't Marek's men," Lyessa shouted while deflecting another strike. "Too organized." Aldrich sensed it too. Their movements carried military precision. Then he saw the symbol stitched inside one fallen assassin's collar, a silver serpent coiled around a crown. His expression darkened instantly. "The Order of Vey," he murmured. Lyessa heard the name and froze for half a heartbeat. That cult was destroyed decades ago. "No," Aldrich said as blue fire ignited around his hands. "It merely went underground." Then the palace ceiling exploded inward. Stone and burning timber rained across the eastern gallery as armored figures crashed through the shattered ceiling on chains, their silver serpent emblems gleaming in the firelight while panicked servants fled screaming through smoke-filled corridors, and Aldrich reacted before the debris even struck the floor, extending one arm toward Lyessa as a translucent barrier of blue light curved over them both just as massive marble fragments slammed against it hard enough to send cracks of energy rippling across the shield, while nearby guards who failed to reach cover were crushed instantly beneath falling beams, and through the chaos a towering man in black iron armor landed at the center of the ruined hall with enough force to fracture the stone beneath his boots. He carried no visible weapon except for a long staff carved from dark bone, yet the surviving assassins immediately stepped back from him with fearful obedience. "The exile mage," the armored man said, his voice deep and distorted behind a horned helm. "You were more difficult to find than expected." Aldrich stared at him without recognition. "You destroyed half a palace for an introduction. You carry something that belongs to us." "I carry many things." The man tilted his head slightly. "The Ember Codex." Lyessa glanced sharply toward Aldrich. "What is he talking about?" Aldrich ignored her. "You should have stayed buried with the old kingdoms," he told the armored stranger. The man laughed softly. "The old kingdoms are returning." Then he slammed the staff into the floor, and black energy erupted outward in twisting tendrils that crawled across the walls like living shadows, causing soldiers to collapse screaming as their skin turned pale and frost spread over their bodies. Lyessa lunged toward one of the afflicted guards but Aldrich caught her arm. "Don't touch them. They're dying. If you touch the curse it will consume you too." His voice carried absolute certainty, and for reasons she could not explain Lyessa obeyed even while rage burned in her chest. Aldrich stepped forward alone now, eyes glowing faintly silver as ancient symbols ignited beneath his feet in widening circles. The armored man noticed and straightened slightly. "Interesting," he muttered. "You learned more than survival during exile." Aldrich answered by thrusting both hands outward. The air detonated with invisible force. Every remaining assassin in the hall was hurled backward violently, smashing through pillars and walls, while the armored leader dug his boots into the stone and resisted the blast with visible strain. Windows exploded across the corridor. Torches extinguished simultaneously. Somewhere deep below the palace, alarms began ringing. The stranger recovered first and spun his staff in a sharp arc, releasing a wave of black fire that tore toward Aldrich like a living storm. Lyessa expected him to dodge, but instead he walked directly into the flames. For one terrifying second the darkness swallowed him completely. Then silver light erupted from inside the firestorm, shredding it apart from within, and Aldrich emerged untouched except for wind whipping through his hair as though unseen power surrounded him. Even the armored man stepped back now. You touched the well of Avalon, he said quietly. Impossible. Aldrich's expression hardened with sudden fury at those words, and the temperature in the hall dropped sharply. Do not speak of that place. The stranger realized he had struck a nerve and smiled beneath the helm. So the stories are true. Before Aldrich could respond, more explosions thundered outside across the capital city. Through shattered windows they saw distant fires rising near the harbor while bells rang frantically from every tower. Lyessa swore under her breath. This attack wasn't only for the palace. No, Aldrich said. It's a diversion. The armored man lifted one hand toward the ceiling where surviving assassins began retreating upward along chains. We already have what we came for. Aldrich's eyes narrowed dangerously. What did you take? Instead of answering, the stranger pointed toward Lyessa. Ask your future queen what sleeps beneath this kingdom. Then he leaped backward through the ruins, sealing into the storm beyond, vanishing into darkness alongside the remaining assassins. For several seconds only smoke and distant screams filled the shattered hall. Then Lyessa pulled free from Aldrich's grip and immediately barked orders to nearby soldiers, her commanding presence cutting through the panic with practiced authority. Seal the eastern gates. Get healers to the lower chambers. Nobody enters or leaves the palace grounds without my permission. Guards rushed to obey. Aldrich meanwhile knelt beside one of the cursed soldiers convulsing on the floor. Black veins spread beneath the man's skin toward his throat. Hold still, Aldrich said quietly. The soldier barely managed a terrified nod before Aldrich pressed glowing fingers against his chest and whispered in the ancient tongue. Silver light flowed from his hand into the dying guard's body while darkness hissed outward like smoke escaping wounds. The process lasted nearly a minute, leaving Aldrich visibly drained by the end, but the black veins slowly retreated and the soldier's breathing stabilized. Lyessa watched closely. You can heal that curse? Temporarily. Aldrich rose unsteadily. If too much spreads, the soul burns away before the body dies. She studied him with growing uncertainty. Who exactly are you? Before he answered, another voice echoed through the ruined corridor. A question the entire kingdom would like answered. King Edric approached surrounded by royal guards, though unlike most rulers he carried a sword himself despite his age and obvious exhaustion. His expression darkened at the destruction around him. Half my palace in flames, he muttered. I leave one meeting early and chaos arrives. Lyessa moved toward him immediately. Father, the attackers belong to the Order of Vey. That name visibly affected the king. That cult died before you were born. Apparently not. Aldrich stepped closer. They came for the Ember Codex. Edric's face lost color. How do you know that name? Because they hunted me across 3 continents for it. Silence fell again, heavier this time. The king dismissed nearby guards with a sharp gesture until only Lyessa and Aldrich remained beside him. Not here, Edric said quietly. Come with me. He led them through hidden corridors beneath the palace where ancient stone replaced polished marble and torchlight revealed carvings far older than the kingdom itself, depicting hooded figures kneeling before enormous trees whose branches touched stars. The deeper they traveled, the colder the air became. Finally they reached a circular chamber sealed by massive iron doors engraved with protective runes. At the chamber's center stood a black stone pedestal supporting an empty cradle-shaped stand. Lyessa frowned immediately. What was kept here? The king looked toward Aldrich. The Ember Codex. Aldrich stared at the empty pedestal with unreadable eyes. Then they succeeded. You knew it was beneath the palace? Edric asked. I suspected. Lyessa crossed her arms sharply. Can someone explain what in the gods' names this thing actually is? The king hesitated. Aldrich answered instead. A map. To what? Aldrich's gaze drifted toward the ancient carvings on the walls. The Well of Avalon. Lyessa waited for further explanation. When none came, irritation flashed across her face. That means nothing to me. Aldrich turned toward her slowly. Thousands of years ago, before Avalon became a kingdom, mages drew power from a living source buried beneath this land. A place where magic itself was born. A myth, she said immediately, though uncertainty lingered beneath her confidence now. Most myths begin as truth. King Edric rubbed tired eyes. The Order of Vey believes whoever controls the well can reshape kingdoms. Can they? Lyessa asked. Aldric's silence answered more than words. The princess studied him carefully. You've seen it. Yes. And? For the first time since his return, genuine emotion flickered visibly across Aldric's face, not anger or coldness but something far more unsettling, fear. No human should touch that power, he said quietly. Before Lyessa could question him further, the chamber trembled violently. Dust fell from the ceiling. A distant roar echoed through the underground passages, deep enough to vibrate through stone itself. The king gripped his sword instinctively. What was that? Another tremor hit harder than before. Aldric's expression sharpened instantly. The seals. He moved toward the chamber exit at once. Lyessa followed close behind. What seals? The ones protecting the catacombs beneath the palace. Protecting them from what? Aldric stopped abruptly halfway up the corridor stairs and looked back at her. Dragons. Lyessa almost laughed until she realized he was completely serious. Then a deafening crash thundered from somewhere below them, followed by distant screams rising through the underground tunnels, and hot wind blasted upward carrying the unmistakable scent of fire and blood. Guards began shouting far above in the palace levels while bells rang again across the city. Aldric closed his eyes briefly as though listening to something ancient stirring beneath the earth itself. When he opened them again, silver light burned within them brighter than ever before. The Order didn't steal the codex just to find the well, he said. They came to wake what guards it. The next tremor split the corridor wall beside them and sent ancient stone crashing across the stairway while smoke and embers erupted upward from the darkness below, and for one brief instant Lyessa saw movement deep within the collapsing tunnel. Something enormous shifting behind firelight with scales blacker than coal and eyes glowing like molten gold before the creature vanished again beneath falling debris, but the roar that followed shook the entire palace hard enough to topple statues from their alcoves. Soldiers farther up the stairwell panicked openly now. One dropped his spear and fled upward despite officers screaming for order. King Edric braced himself against the wall, breathing hard. This cannot be happening, he muttered. Aldric ignored the chaos and stared downward into the burning depths with the rigid focus of a man confronting a nightmare he had hoped never to see again. It's young, he said. If it were fully grown, the palace would already be ash. Lyessa unsheathed the curved sword hanging at her hip. You say that like it's comforting. Another crash echoed below, followed by a torrent of flames blasting through the lower tunnel, turning several guards into screaming silhouettes before they collapsed blackened to the floor. The surviving soldiers recoiled in horror. Aldric stepped directly into the path of the fire and raised one hand. Silver energy exploded outward around him in a spiraling barrier that split the inferno apart like water striking stone. Heat rolled through the corridor so violently that torches burst from their brackets. Lyessa shielded her eyes against the glare. Through the flames she finally saw the creature clearly as it climbed from the lower catacombs into the palace foundations, a dragon perhaps 30 feet long, lean rather than massive, with jagged horns curling backward from its skull and chains hanging broken from around its neck, the iron links glowing red from heat. Its scales looked cracked in places as though molten light burned beneath them. The beast dragged itself upward with obvious fury and confusion, slamming its tail against the walls hard enough to splinter stone pillars. Several guards broke completely and ran. The dragon noticed movement instantly. With terrifying speed it lunged upward and seized one fleeing soldier in its jaws before anyone could react. Blood sprayed across the tunnel. Lyessa swore and charged without hesitation, ducking beneath another sweep of flame while shouting orders at the remaining guards to fall back toward the upper halls. Aldric watched her go with visible surprise, as though unused to nobles running toward danger instead of away from it. Lyessa leaped onto a fallen slab of stone and drove her sword downward at the dragon's exposed neck as it tore apart the dead guard, but the blade barely pierced the scales before the creature whipped around with a snarl. She barely avoided being crushed beneath one claw.
"Princess," a captain shouted. The dragon lunged again. This time Aldrich moved.
One moment he stood near the stairwell, the next he appeared between Lyessa and the beast in a burst of silver light, catching the descending claw with both hands while the impact shattered stone beneath his boots. Lyessa stared in disbelief as raw magical force surged around him like a storm barely contained inside human flesh. The dragon roared directly into his face, hot breath washing across him, but Aldrich did not flinch. Instead he spoke sharply in the ancient language, and the creature froze mid-motion. Not completely still, but enough to hesitate. Its burning eyes narrowed. "You know the old tongue," Lyessa said in shock. Aldrich kept his gaze locked on the dragon. "All true dragons do." The beast growled low in its throat, then answered with a guttural sound unlike any human language yet somehow deliberate. Aldrich's expression shifted slightly. "Interesting. What did it say?" Lyessa asked. "It asked why I wear the mark of the well." Before she could process that, the dragon suddenly thrashed violently and broke free from whatever spell had restrained it. Aldrich cursed under his breath as the creature slammed him backward through a stone archway. Lyessa immediately seized the opening and drove her blade deeper into a crack beneath the dragon's jaw. This time it pierced flesh. Dark blood splashed across her armor. The beast screamed in rage and whipped its head sideways, throwing her hard against the corridor wall. She hit stone with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. The dragon turned toward her again, flames building between its teeth. Then a black spear punched through one of its eyes from above. The creature recoiled roaring. Everyone looked upward. Standing atop the fractured stairway stood a tall woman wrapped in a dark green cloak, another spear already spinning in her hand. Her skin carried the bronze tone of southern kingdoms and her black hair was braided tightly against her scalp. "Move," she shouted toward Lyessa. The princess rolled aside just as the woman hurled the second spear directly into the dragon's open mouth. An explosion of sparks erupted from inside the creature's throat. Aldrich emerged from shattered stone nearby, coughing blood once before straightening again. His pale eyes landed on the newcomer with immediate recognition. Seraphine. The woman descended the broken stairs calmly despite the chaos around her. "You look worse than the rumors," she replied. Lyessa pushed herself upright painfully. "You know him?" "Unfortunately," Seraphine answered. The dragon, half-blinded and enraged, smashed through a support pillar and began climbing upward toward the palace halls above where hundreds of civilians still remained. Aldrich's expression darkened instantly. "Stop it before it reaches the upper levels." "How?" Lyessa demanded. Aldrich looked toward the cracked chains dragging behind the creature. Those bindings were forged with runic iron. They can contain it temporarily. Seraphine pulled another weapon from beneath her cloak, this one a hooked blade attached to a chain. "Then let's try before the city burns." What followed barely resembled a battle and felt more like surviving a natural disaster. The dragon burst upward through corridor after corridor while Aldrich, Lyessa, and Seraphine pursued through collapsing tunnels and smoke-filled chambers, working together with instinctive coordination despite barely understanding one another. Lyessa distracted the creature repeatedly with aggressive strikes aimed at vulnerable joints while Seraphine used chains and hooked blades to entangle its movements, and whenever the dragon unleashed fire hot enough to melt armor, Aldrich intercepted the flames with walls of silver energy that left his face increasingly pale from exhaustion. At one point the beast tore through the floor of the royal library and emerged into the upper palace itself, sending nobles and servants fleeing through burning halls while shelves of ancient books collapsed into firestorms around them. Lyessa narrowly escaped being crushed beneath a falling chandelier only because Aldrich dragged her clear at the last second. "You nearly died," he snapped. She glared at him while blood ran from a cut above her eyebrow. "Then stop sounding surprised every time I fight." Seraphine overheard and laughed breathlessly while vaulting over debris. "I like her already." "That makes one of us," Aldrich muttered. Eventually they drove the wounded dragon onto the palace's highest terrace overlooking the storm-covered city. Rain poured heavily now, turning blood into dark rivers across the stone. Below them Caer Iden burned in scattered districts from the Order's attacks. Bells rang endlessly through the night. The dragon crouched near the terrace edge breathing heavily, one ruined eye leaking black blood while chains dragged around its limbs. Up close, Lyessa noticed scars covering much of its body, old wounds layered over newer torture marks. "Wait," she said suddenly. "Look at it." Aldrich glanced toward her impatiently. "What?" "Those scars weren't from battle." Seraphine's expression hardened. "No. They kept it imprisoned." The dragon growled weakly now rather than roaring. Rain hissed against smoke rising from its scales. Aldrich stepped closer carefully. "It's terrified," Lyessa realized aloud. "Not attacking. Escaping." The creature's remaining eye fixed on Aldrich again. Slowly, painfully, it lowered its massive head. Seraphine immediately tensed. "Don't trust that." But Aldrich studied the dragon for several long seconds before speaking softly in the ancient tongue once more. This time the creature answered with a low rumbling sound that vibrated through the terrace stones. Lyessa watched the exchange with growing disbelief. "You can actually understand it." "Fragments," Aldrich admitted. "Enough." "What is it saying?" Aldrich hesitated. Rain streamed down his scarred face while distant fires flickered across the city below them. Finally he answered. "It says the order woke more than one." Silence hit harder than the storm. Then from somewhere far beyond the capital, deep in the mountains surrounding Avalon, another roar echoed across the night sky. Older. Vastly larger. Even the wounded dragon recoiled at the sound. Seraphine closed her eyes briefly. "We're too late," she whispered. Lyessa turned toward her sharply. "Who are you?" The woman met her gaze steadily. "The last dragon hunter of Varek." Aldrich looked toward the dark mountains where thunder rolled across hidden peaks. "No," he said quietly. "Not the last anymore." Then the palace tower behind them exploded outward in a cyclone of black fire, and a figure cloaked entirely in shadow emerged from the flames hovering above the terrace with the stolen Ember Codex floating open before him, pages turning wildly in the storm wind while ancient symbols burned across the sky itself, and the moment Aldrich saw the man's face every trace of composure vanished from him for the first time since returning to Avalon. "You," he said, voice colder than death. The shadowed figure smiled faintly. "Hello, brother." Rain hammered the palace terrace while thunder rolled across Avalon's mountains, and every soldier below who witnessed the figure hovering above the burning tower immediately fled in terror because the air around him felt wrong, twisted by power that bent torchlight into unnatural shapes and made stone crack beneath invisible pressure, and Lyessa stared between the two men in disbelief because despite the years and scars there was no mistaking the resemblance between Aldrich and the stranger. Cloaked in shadow, the same sharp features, the same pale eyes, though where Aldrich's gaze carried exhaustion and restrained fury, his brother's eyes burned with feverish delight. "Selim," Aldrich said again, quieter this time, as though speaking the name reopened wounds buried beneath years of war and exile. The shadowed man smiled wider. "I wondered whether you would embrace me or try to kill me first." Seraphine immediately stepped between Lyessa and the hovering figure, chain blades spinning loosely around one wrist. "That thing isn't your brother anymore." Selim laughed softly at that. "Still dramatic, Seraphine. I remember when you stabbed me in the spine coast and pushed me into the sea. I should have used a heavier rock afterward." The wounded dragon behind them growled low and backed toward the terrace edge, clearly disturbed by Selim's presence. The Ember Codex floated before him, its ancient pages turning rapidly despite the rain, symbols blazing brighter with every passing second. Aldrich took one step forward. "You died in Merfall." "So did you," Selim replied. "Yet here we stand." Lyessa looked sharply toward Aldrich. "You never mentioned a brother." "Because he's supposed to be dead." Selim tilted his head. "And there it is. The warmth of family reunion." Then his expression shifted instantly from amusement to hatred sharp enough to cut through the storm itself. "You left me there." The word struck harder than any spell. Aldrich's jaw tightened visibly. "I tried to save you." "No," Selim snapped. Black fire erupted violently around him. "You chose the well over me." The terrace trembled beneath the surge of power.
Several shattered statues toppled over the edge into the city below. Lyessa glanced between them, realizing fragments of some far older tragedy lurked beneath this confrontation. Aldrich's voice lowered dangerously.
You have no idea what the well truly is anymore.
I know exactly what it is, Selim answered. Freedom.
Then he spread his arms and the storm above the capital twisted unnaturally, clouds spiraling inward around a growing vortex of red lightning. Across the city people screamed as windows shattered from the pressure. For centuries Avalon buried its true inheritance beneath fear and lies, Selim declared, his voice echoing across the skyline unnaturally loud.
Tonight the chains break. Aldrich moved instantly.
Silver light exploded around him as he launched upward toward his brother with enough force to crater the terrace beneath his feet, but Selim merely smiled and vanished into black smoke before Aldrich struck. A heartbeat later he reappeared behind him and drove a blast of dark energy into Aldrich's back hard enough to send him crashing through the palace tower wall. Stone erupted outward across the terrace. Lyessa drew her sword immediately while Seraphine hurled two hooked blades connected by chains toward Selim's throat. He caught both weapons effortlessly in midair without even looking at them. You'll need more than old tricks, he said. With a flick of his wrist the chains snapped apart and Seraphine staggered backward from the force. Then the Ember Codex flared brightly. Ancient symbols ignited across the terrace floor in concentric circles spreading beneath everyone's feet. The wounded dragon roared in panic. Aldrich burst back through the ruined tower wall surrounded by silver flames, fury radiating from him now with none of the restraint he had shown until this moment. Get away from the glyphs, he shouted. Lyessa immediately jumped backward without hesitation, trusting the urgency in his voice, but several arriving palace guards were too slow. The glowing symbols beneath them erupted upward into pillars of black fire that consumed flesh instantly, leaving only ash drifting through the rain. Selim watched calmly. Still protecting them, he observed. You always did love hopeless things. Aldrich answered by raising both hands toward the sky. The storm itself responded. Lightning speared downward in a blinding silver column directly onto the terrace. Selim crossed his arms and absorbed the strike into darkness swirling around him, but the impact still drove him backward several feet across the stone. For the first time his smile faded slightly. Good, he said. I was afraid exile made you weak. What followed no longer resembled mortal combat. The brothers collided across the palace heights with magic violent enough to shake the city below. Silver fire against living shadow. Lightning crashing into storms of black ash. Towers shattered around them while fragments of glowing runes spiraled through the air like broken stars. Lyessa had fought wars against northern raiders and seen siege engines demolish castle walls, but nothing in her life resembled the scale of destruction unfolding now. At one point Selim tore an entire section of the tower free using invisible force and hurled it downward toward crowded palace courtyards below. Aldrich abandoned his attack instantly to stop the falling debris, straining visibly as silver energy wrapped around the collapsing stone and lowered it away from civilians. Selim saw this and laughed bitterly. There he is. The martyr. Aldrich released the debris safely into the courtyard below, breathing harder now. And there you are, he replied. Still blaming the world for your own choices. Selim's face darkened with sudden rage. You think I chose what happened at the well? His voice cracked the terrace floor beneath him. You dragged me into that place. For a fraction of a second Aldrich hesitated. That hesitation cost him. Selim struck him with a concentrated spear of black energy directly through the chest. Lyessa shouted involuntarily as Aldrich staggered backward, silver light flickering violently around him. Blood spread across his clothing. Selim lowered his hands slowly. You should have let me die that day, he said quietly. Then the wounded dragon moved. Until now it had remained near the terrace edge watching the battle in growing agitation, but suddenly it lunged between the brothers with a roar powerful enough to interrupt the storm itself. Selim reacted instinctively and blasted the creature aside with dark fire. The dragon crashed through broken columns, scales smoking. But its attack had not been aimed to kill. It had aimed to protect Aldrich.
Everyone realized it at once.
Even Selim paused briefly in confusion. Aldrich looked toward the wounded beast struggling to rise, and something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but recognition. The dragon met his gaze and rumbled weakly in the ancient tongue.
Seraphine stared. What did it say? Aldrich's eyes widened slightly. It knows me. Selim's amusement vanished completely. Impossible.
You imprisoned them beneath the palace, Aldrich said slowly, pieces connecting in his mind.
Not as weapons. He looked directly at his brother now. As guardians. For the first time uncertainty flickered across Selim's face. Aldrich pressed forward despite blood running down his chest wound. You never understood the well, he said.
The dragons weren't chained to keep them contained.
Realization struck Lyessa at the same moment. They were chained to keep something else out. Silence followed, heavy and terrible.
Then the Ember Codex began turning pages wildly on its own. The glowing symbols above the city shifted into a shape none of them recognized.
Selim looked toward the floating book sharply. No, he murmured.
The wounded dragon suddenly screamed in terror and threw itself flat against the terrace stones. Every torch across the capital extinguished simultaneously. Even the storm seemed to stop moving for one unnatural heartbeat. Then a voice echoed across Avalon from beneath the mountains themselves, vast and ancient and unmistakably inhuman.
The gate opens. The words were not spoken aloud so much as forced directly into every mind within the city.
Thousands of people below collapsed screaming.
Lyessa nearly dropped to one knee from the pressure of it.
Aldrich's face went completely still in a way that frightened her more than panic would have. Selim slowly turned toward the distant mountains now glowing faintly red beneath the clouds.
What was that? He whispered.
Aldrich answered without taking his eyes off the horizon. The thing the dragons were guarding against. Then the mountain range split open with a line of crimson light stretching across the night like a wound carved into the world itself. The crimson fracture spreading across Avalon's mountains illuminated the storm clouds from below like blood shining through cracked ice, and for several endless seconds the entire capital stood frozen beneath the terrible glow while distant rumbling rolled outward across the land with the slow inevitability of an earthquake. But this was no natural disaster because the sound carried rhythm, like breathing, and every dragon within hearing distance reacted instantly. The wounded creature on the terrace lowered itself flat against the stone with a whine almost canine in its fear, while far beyond the city other roars echoed from hidden caverns and ruined valleys, not aggressive now but panicked, ancient predators suddenly reduced to frightened animals.
Lyessa forced herself upright despite the pressure crushing against her thoughts. Tell me exactly what is happening. Aldrich did not answer immediately.
His eyes remained fixed on the glowing mountains while silver light flickered unevenly around him, weakened by the wound Selim had driven through his chest. Rain washed blood down his black clothing in dark streams. Beside them Selim stared toward the horizon as though witnessing his own nightmare take shape.
The Codex never mentioned this, he muttered. Because the Codex was incomplete, Aldrich said coldly. The missing pages were destroyed after the first breach. Seraphine's expression tightened. First breach?
Thousands of years ago, Aldrich replied, before Avalon existed, something came through the well.
Another tremor shook the city. Tower bells collapsed from their spires.
Screams echoed upward from crowded streets below as people fled in confusion beneath raining debris. The crimson line in the mountains widened further, and from within that impossible wound came movement, vast shadows shifting behind the glow. Selim took a slow step backward for the first time since appearing.
No, he whispered. I opened the path to the well. Nothing else.
Aldrich finally turned toward him, and the fury in his pale eyes carried something deeper now, disappointment sharpened by grief.
You never listened, he said quietly. Not to the masters. Not to me. Power always blinded you.
Do not speak to me like I'm still your student, Selim snapped, though uncertainty poisoned the anger beneath his voice now.
I surpassed every mage in Avalon. And still understood nothing.
The crimson light suddenly pulsed brighter. Every window remaining in the capital shattered at once.
Lyessa flinched as invisible pressure swept through the terrace.
Then figures began emerging from the distant mountain fracture.
At first they looked human-sized against the enormous cliffs, but as they descended the scale became horrifyingly clear. Tall. Thin.
Moving with unnatural smoothness across impossible terrain. Their bodies resembled armored skeletons forged from black stone and glowing magma, with elongated limbs ending in blade-like claws that carved trenches into rock as they climbed downward.
Behind them larger shapes stirred within the red glow. Seraphine swore softly in a language Lyessa did not recognize. "What are they?" Lyessa asked.
Aldrich answered with visible reluctance.
"The Veros." "I've never heard that name."
"You were never meant to."
Selim tore his gaze from the mountains and rounded on Aldrich. "You knew these things existed and said nothing?"
"Because knowledge of them nearly destroyed the world once already."
"So instead you buried the truth?"
"I buried a door." The first Veros reached the lower mountain forests. Even from miles away the destruction became immediately visible. Entire sections of woodland ignited in crimson fire, spreading unnaturally fast, not consuming trees normally but turning them black and crystalline. Animals poured from the forests in terrified waves visible even at that distance. The wounded dragon suddenly rose with a violent roar and spread its damaged wings. Aldrich stepped toward it slowly, speaking again in the ancient tongue. The creature answered with urgent snarls and gestures toward the mountains.
"What's it saying?" Lyessa asked.
"That the others are waking."
"The other dragons?" Aldrich nodded once.
"They guarded the seals for centuries.
If the breach opens fully, they'll attack anything near it." Selim let out a bitter laugh devoid of humor. "Wonderful. Ancient monsters fighting ancient monsters while an entire kingdom sits in the middle."
"You created this," Seraphine said sharply. "I didn't know." "That stopped mattering the moment you opened the gate."
Selim looked ready to retaliate, but another sound interrupted them, deeper than thunder and infinitely more terrifying.
From within the mountain fracture itself, something massive moved forward behind the red glow.
The surrounding peaks trembled. Even the Veros climbing below it seemed insignificant by comparison. Lyessa felt the blood drain from her face.
"Aldrich," she said carefully, "tell me that thing cannot reach the city."
He remained silent too long. Then, far below in the streets of Caer Iden, horns began sounding in organized succession. Military signals. Lyessa snapped back to focus instantly.
The city guards mobilizing. She turned toward the palace stairs. If people panic, thousands die before those creatures even arrive. Seraphine grabbed her arm. "Your soldiers cannot fight this."
"Maybe not," Lyessa answered, "but they can evacuate civilians."
She looked directly at Aldrich now.
"Can the breach be closed?"
Aldrich hesitated.
"Yes."
Selim looked sharply toward him.
"You said the well couldn't be controlled." "It can't." "Then how?" Aldrich's silence returned. Seraphine understood first.
"No," she said immediately.
"Absolutely not." Lyessa frowned between them. "What?"
Seraphine pointed toward Aldrich angrily.
"He's thinking about sealing it from inside."
The princess stared at Aldrich.
"Inside what?"
"The well," he answered calmly. "If the gate fully opens, nothing in Avalon survives."
"There has to be another way." "There isn't." Selim stepped forward abruptly. "You don't get to decide that alone."
Aldrich met his brother's gaze.
"You surrendered that right tonight."
For a moment it seemed Selim might attack him again, but instead something unexpected crossed his expression, guilt buried beneath years of arrogance and resentment. "I never wanted this," he said quietly.
Aldrich's reply came without cruelty, which somehow hurt more. Intentions stop mattering when cities burn. Another pulse of crimson light rolled across the kingdom. This time people below the terrace began collapsing in the streets merely from exposure to it. Black crystal growths spread across buildings nearest the mountains. Lyessa watched in horror as one distant tower twisted sideways and crumbled apart without anything touching it.
Enough, she said sharply. We can argue after we survive the next hour. The practical force in her voice cut through the chaos. Aldrich looked at her properly then, perhaps for the first time since returning to Avalon, not as a political burden or temporary ally but as someone refusing to surrender while the world collapsed around her. She pointed toward the mountains. If we close the breach, we need to reach it first.
Seraphine nodded grimly.
The old northern passes lead closest.
Blocked by winter cliffs, Selim muttered automatically. Not if the frost bridges still stand, Layessa countered.
Both men looked at her with surprise.
What? She asked irritably. I read maps. Despite everything, a faint ghost of amusement touched Aldrich's face before vanishing again. The wounded dragon suddenly nudged Aldrich with its enormous head, rumbling insistently.
Aldrich listened carefully to the sounds it made.
It says it can carry us part of the way. Seraphine blinked.
That thing can barely stand. The dragon growled at her indignantly.
Apparently it disagrees.
Below them the palace grounds erupted into fresh panic as black-armored Veros began appearing at the edges of the capital itself, moving impossibly fast from the mountains. The first wave reached the outer districts within minutes, carving through city guards with terrifying efficiency. They did not roar or scream during battle. They moved in absolute silence except for the grinding sound of their molten bodies scraping against steel. Layessa watched one tear through 6 soldiers without slowing.
Gods, she whispered.
Selim stared downward in growing horror.
I did this. Nobody contradicted him.
Then from the northern sky came another sound, dragons.
Not one, but many.
Massive winged silhouettes emerged through storm clouds above Avalon, scales flashing silver, bronze, crimson, and midnight black as they descended toward the invading Veros with earth-shaking roars.
Citizens below stopped fleeing long enough to stare upward in stunned disbelief.
Seraphine actually laughed once, sharp and disbelieving.
I never thought I'd live to see that again.
The dragons collided with the leading Veros at the edge of the city in an explosion of fire and shattered stone. One black dragon seized a molten creature in its jaws and hurled it through 3 buildings. Another unleashed white fire cold enough to freeze entire streets solid.
But for every Veros destroyed, more emerged from the mountains.
Aldrich watched the battle only briefly before turning toward the palace interior.
We leave now. Layessa followed immediately.
I'll gather surviving riders.
No, Aldrich said.
Too slow.
Selim stepped beside them at last, shadow magic flickering weakly around him now like a dying flame.
You'll need my power to reopen the path once we reach the well.
Seraphine's hand moved instantly toward a dagger. And trust you not to destroy the world again halfway there? Selim met her glare without defense. You won't. Confident.
No, he said quietly.
Necessary.
Aldrich studied his brother for several tense seconds while battle raged across the burning capital below.
Finally he spoke. You come with us. Selim nodded once. And if I lose control again?
Aldrich's answer carried the cold certainty of a man who had already rehearsed this possibility in his mind. Then I kill you before the gate fully opens.
Selim accepted that without argument. Another dragon screamed somewhere over the city. The terrace shook beneath the impact of distant battles.
Layessa tightened her grip on her sword and looked toward the burning mountains where crimson light continued spreading across the horizon like dawn from hell itself.
Then she drew one steadying breath. All right, she said. Let's go save Avalon.
They descended through the shattered palace while war consumed the capital around them, and every corridor they crossed revealed another piece of Avalon collapsing beneath forces most of its people could not even comprehend, servants dragging wounded soldiers through smoke-filled halls, nobles abandoning jeweled cloaks to flee alongside commoners, priests kneeling in prayer while the ceiling shook overhead, and beyond broken windows dragons wheeled through the storm battling molten horrors. Above burning rooftops, their roars echoing between towers like the voices of furious gods.
Yet amid the chaos Layessa noticed something unexpected about Aldrich. He never ignored suffering.
Each time they passed injured civilians he paused just long enough to seal a wound, lift fallen debris, or direct survivors toward safer passages. He did it instinctively, without speeches or visible compassion, as though saving lives had become muscle memory buried beneath the coldness he wore like armor. It unsettled her more than his magic.
Selim noticed it too.
Still trying to carry everyone, he muttered while they crossed a collapsed gallery.
Aldrich did not look at him. Someone has to.
They reached the lower stables where surviving royal guards struggled to calm terrified horses while chunks of burning stone occasionally crashed through the ceiling. Captain Rennick, commander of the palace guard, strode toward Lyessa the moment he saw her alive. Blood covered one side of his armor. "Your Highness, the eastern districts are overrun. We've evacuated what civilians we can toward the river gates, but those creatures keep coming."
Lyessa gripped his forearm firmly.
"Hold the bridges as long as possible.
Anyone unable to fight moves south." Rennick's eyes shifted uneasily toward Aldrich and Selim. "And them?"
"With me," she answered immediately. The captain accepted it without further argument because survival no longer left room for court politics. Nearby, the wounded dragon crouched awkwardly within the shattered stable courtyard, far too large for the structure itself.
Horses panicked violently at its presence.
Stable boys hid behind wagons while staring in disbelief. The creature lowered itself enough for Aldrich to climb onto its back, then turned its massive head toward the others impatiently. Seraphine smirked faintly.
"Looks like it likes you."
"I'm beginning to worry about its judgment," Aldrich replied.
Selim approached the dragon cautiously. Unlike Aldrich, he received an immediate growl filled with unmistakable hostility.
"Fair," Selim muttered. Lyessa climbed up behind Aldrich without hesitation despite the creature's heat radiating through its scales.
Seraphine followed last, chain weapons secured across her back. The dragon spread its damaged wings experimentally. One membrane was torn nearly halfway through. "Can it actually fly?" Lyessa asked.
"We're about to discover the answer," Seraphine said. The dragon launched itself from the courtyard before anyone could object further. The takeoff nearly threw Lyessa backward into open air as the beast beat its wings hard enough to scatter burning debris across the palace grounds. Then suddenly the city dropped away beneath them. Caer Iden spread below like a battlefield from the end of the world. Entire districts burned with crimson fire. Crowds flooded bridges and streets in desperate waves while soldiers fought delaying battles at every major intersection. Dragons clashed with Varos high above the rooftops, fire and molten light tearing through towers already weakened by explosions. One silver dragon crashed directly into the harbor, dragging 3 Varos with it, sending ships capsizing beneath enormous waves. Another creature, larger than any Lyessa had ever imagined possible, circled above the northern walls with wings broad enough to eclipse entire buildings. "Gods," she whispered over the roaring wind. Aldrich's gaze remained fixed toward the mountains ahead.
"That's only the beginning."
As they flew northward beyond the capital, the scale of the disaster became clearer. The crimson fracture in the mountains stretched for miles now, pulsing like a heartbeat visible through storm clouds. Rivers near the breach had turned black.
Forests crystallized into jagged obsidian shapes wherever the Varos passed. Yet against that nightmare rose another impossible sight: dragons awakening across Avalon.
Some burst from hidden caves in the cliffs.
Others emerged from beneath frozen lakes or ancient ruins buried for centuries.
They flew toward the mountains in growing numbers, answering instincts older than kingdoms. Seraphine watched them with open awe despite the dangers surrounding them. "My order spent generations hunting dragons," she said quietly. "Turns out we were slaughtering the world's guardians."
"Most people feared what they didn't understand," Aldrich replied. "Including us."
Selim remained silent for most of the flight, staring downward at the devastation with an
expression Lyessa could no longer read easily. Not arrogance now. Not anger either.
He looked haunted. Eventually he spoke without lifting his eyes from the burning land below. "When we found the well," he said quietly, "I thought it chose you." Aldrich's shoulders stiffened slightly. The dragon beneath them growled low at the tension between the brothers.
"It didn't choose anyone," Aldrich answered. "That's not how it works. You survived it."
"Barely."
Selim laughed bitterly. Funny. From where I stood, it looked like destiny itself bent around you. Lyessa listened carefully now. Pieces of their shared history surfaced like ruins beneath dark water. What happened there? She asked. Neither brother answered immediately. Wind roared around them as the dragon banked sharply to avoid two battling shapes crashing through clouds nearby, a bronze dragon grappling with a towering Varos whose molten claws carved glowing wounds across its scales. Finally Aldrich spoke. We were apprentices searching old ruins beyond the eastern deserts. We found a temple older than recorded history. His voice carried no drama, only exhaustion. Beneath it was the well. Selim closed his eyes briefly. Every mage dreams of limitless power, he murmured. And every fool believes they can control it. You touched it first? Lyessa guessed. No, Aldrich said. We both did. Silence followed. Even Seraphine looked toward them now. Selim's jaw tightened. The well showed us different things. What kind of things? Lyessa asked. Aldrich answered this time without hesitation. Truth. Selim gave a hollow smile. Or madness. Lightning flashed across the mountains ahead. They were close enough now to see the breach clearly, a colossal wound split through the earth itself surrounded by swirling crimson storms. Shapes moved constantly within it. Not merely Varos now but larger entities struggling toward the surface. The air grew hotter the closer they flew. The dragon beneath them became increasingly agitated. It doesn't want to go farther, Aldrich said after listening to its uneasy rumbling. Can you blame it? Seraphine muttered. Suddenly the creature jerked violently sideways. A blast of molten energy tore through the air where they had been moments earlier. Another Varos descended from the clouds above them, larger than the others and armored in obsidian plates glowing red through deep cracks. It carried a spear forged entirely from black crystal. Hold on! Lyessa shouted instinctively as the enemy crashed into the dragon midair. Chaos erupted instantly. The dragon roared and twisted violently while Seraphine launched herself across its back to drive a hooked blade into the Varos's arm. Selim unleashed black fire that collided with molten energy in a blinding explosion. Aldrich grabbed Lyessa just before the sudden spin hurled her into open sky. Wind screamed past them as the dragon lost altitude rapidly. The Varos climbed onto the creature's neck, stabbing downward repeatedly with its crystal spear. Black blood sprayed across the clouds. It'll kill the dragon! Lyessa shouted. Aldrich released her and moved forward along the creature's spine despite hurricane-force wind battering against him. Silver runes ignited beneath his feet with each step. The Varos noticed him and lunged instantly. Aldrich caught the crystal spear inches from his throat. The impact cracked the air around them. Up close the creature's face resembled molten stone stretched over a skull with burning light visible through every fracture. It emitted no roar, no threat, only silence. Aldrich stared into the thing's glowing eyes. You don't belong here, he said. Then he drove his hand directly into the Varos's chest. Silver light erupted through every crack in the creature's body simultaneously. For the first time the Varos screamed. The sound resembled mountains collapsing. It exploded apart in a storm of molten fragments that rained into the forests far below. But the victory came too late to stop their descent. The dragon spiraled downward, trailing blood and smoke toward the frozen cliffs beneath the mountains. Brace yourselves! Seraphine yelled. They crashed through pine trees hard enough to snap trunks in half before slamming across a snow-covered ridge. Lyessa was thrown violently from the dragon's back and rolled through ice and stone until something caught her arm. Aldrich. He anchored himself against a boulder one-handed while holding her above a steep ravine with the other. Snow crumbled beneath them into darkness. For several breathless seconds neither spoke. Wind howled across the cliffs around them. Then Lyessa looked up into his pale eyes. You bleed a lot for an immortal nightmare, she said breathlessly. To her surprise, Aldrich laughed once. Short. Genuine. Human. He pulled her safely onto solid ground.
Nearby, Seraphine emerged from wreckage coughing while Selim helped the wounded dragon drag itself away from the shattered trees. The creature's breathing sounded rough now. Aldrich approached it slowly. The dragon lowered its head weakly against the snow and rumbled softly. Aldrich listened, expression unreadable. "What did it say?" Lyessa asked. He rested one hand gently against the dragon's scarred scales. "It says the well remembers us." Before anyone could ask what that meant, the mountains ahead trembled violently. A massive shadow began rising from within the crimson breach itself, larger than castles, larger than dragons, its shape still half hidden by storms and glowing ruin. Even the air seemed to recoil from its presence. Seraphine stared upward in horror. "That's not Avero's." Aldrich's face hardened. "No," he said quietly. "That's their king." The thing emerging from the breach climbed slowly at first, not because it lacked strength but because the mountain itself seemed too small to contain it, and as crimson storms spiraled around the colossal figure the surrounding peaks cracked apart beneath its weight, avalanches crashing into burning forests while entire ridgelines collapsed into the glowing abyss below, and for one terrible moment Lyessa could not fully comprehend what she was seeing because the creature's shape resisted. Simple understanding, shifting between forms whenever lightning illuminated it, sometimes resembling an enormous armored giant with antler-like horns sweeping backward from a skull of black stone, other times appearing almost serpentine, its spine stretching impossibly long through the clouds, but always there remained those eyes, vast burning circles like suns seen through volcanic smoke. The surviving dragon beside them whimpered low in its throat and pressed itself against the snow despite its size. Selim stared upward, pale beneath the flickering red light. "I opened the gate for that," he whispered. Aldrich did not answer. His attention remained fixed on the creature with the rigid stillness of someone facing an enemy from a nightmare long believed buried forever. Seraphine recovered first. "How far to the well?" "Beyond the breach," Aldrich replied. "Inside the mountain." Lyessa looked at him sharply. "You're telling me we need to walk toward that thing? Unless you know another route." "I was hoping you did." Another pulse of crimson energy exploded outward from the breach. This one hit with physical force, knocking snow from cliffsides and hurling all four of them backward several steps. Far below in the valleys, black crystal growth spread across the land faster than wildfire. Trees twisted into jagged obsidian sculptures. Rivers froze solid beneath crimson frost. The Veros pouring from the mountains suddenly halted as one and turned toward the colossal being climbing from the abyss. Then every single creature knelt. Even from miles away the synchronized movement felt deeply wrong. Seraphine swore quietly. "They worship it." "No," Aldrich said. "They fear it." The giant figure finally pulled itself fully onto the mountainside. The scale of it dwarfed entire castles. Molten light pulsed through cracks in its armor-like body while chains thicker than ship masts dangled broken from one arm, as though something unimaginably ancient had once imprisoned it deep beneath the earth. Then it lifted its head toward the storm-covered sky and spoke. Not in words. In sound. A single roar rolled across Avalon that shattered glaciers and burst open frozen lakes miles away. Lyessa dropped to one knee as blood trickled from one ear. The dragon screamed in terror beside them. Far overhead, dragons battling across the skies recoiled mid-flight. Several younger ones simply fled. Selim clenched his head between his hands. "Make it stop." Aldrich's voice remained steady despite the roar shaking the world around them. "That's only its awakening." "Only?" Lyessa snapped. "What exactly is that thing?" Aldrich looked toward the burning titan. "Its true name cannot be translated into human language anymore." "Try anyway." He hesitated briefly. "The closest meaning would be, the Devourer King." Even Seraphine went silent at that. The giant creature began moving down the mountainside. Each step caused earthquakes. Veros scattered from its path instantly. "If it reaches the lowlands," Lyessa began. "Avalon dies," Aldrich finished. Selim suddenly turned toward his brother with desperation replacing pride for the first time. "Tell me there's still a way to close the breach." "There is."
Then why are we standing here? Aldrich met his gaze coldly. Because the well won't let just anyone enter. Selim frowned. What does that mean?
It means the last time we touched it, the well changed us.
Seraphine's expression darkened with realization. That's why dragons recognize you. Aldrich nodded once. The well binds itself to whatever survives contact with it. Selim let out a humorless laugh. Survives. Nice choice of word. Lyessa looked between them carefully. What happened to the others who found it? Neither brother answered immediately. The silence itself became answer enough.
Wind howled through the cliffs around them, carrying distant screams and dragon roars from the war spreading below.
Finally Aldrich spoke quietly.
There were 12 of us when we entered the temple beneath the eastern desert.
Selim stared at the snow. 3 came back out.
Lyessa felt cold despite the burning mountains ahead.
And the third? Selim's mouth tightened.
He begged us to kill him before sunset.
None of them spoke after that. The Devourer King continued descending from the breach, each movement shaking avalanches loose around its feet.
Yet something else stirred now within the crimson abyss behind it. More shapes. Larger Veros climbing upward in endless numbers. Seraphine drew her chain blade slowly.
We don't have time for ghosts. Aldrich nodded.
The northern pass leads directly beneath the breach. From there we enter the mountain.
Lyessa glanced toward the exhausted dragon. And our ride?
The creature lifted its head stubbornly despite blood freezing across its scales. Aldrich listened to its low rumble and almost smiled again. It says it can still fly short distances.
Stubborn beast. Apparently we share that quality.
They resumed the journey across the frozen ridges with the dragon carrying them only when cliffs became impossible to cross on foot. The closer they approached the breach, the stranger the world became.
Snow turned gray beneath their boots. Shadows moved incorrectly against the light.
At one point Lyessa saw figures standing among distant trees, human silhouettes watching silently, but when she blinked they vanished.
Selim noticed her reaction.
Don't stare too long, he warned quietly. The breach changes perception.
You say that like experience.
I say it because the well showed me things I still see in dreams.
Aldrich walked ahead without looking back. Keep moving.
Hours passed through smoke-filled valleys and fractured mountain trails while the war across Avalon worsened behind them.
Dragons streaked overhead constantly now, some wounded badly, others carrying riders from forgotten orders long thought extinct. Once they encountered survivors fleeing south, an entire caravan of villagers escorted by exhausted soldiers. The moment the civilians recognized Lyessa they nearly collapsed with relief. One old woman grabbed the princess's hands desperately. Your Highness, are the gods punishing us? Lyessa looked toward the burning mountains before answering carefully. No. But something worse is coming if we stop fighting.
The woman's eyes shifted fearfully toward Aldrich and Selim nearby.
Are those mages?
Before Lyessa could respond, Aldrich stepped forward and quietly healed a young boy whose leg had been crushed beneath falling stone.
Silver light sealed the injury within seconds.
The surrounding villagers stared at him in stunned silence.
Go south, Aldrich said simply. Do not stop for anyone. The boys.
Mother burst into tears thanking him, but Aldrich had already turned away before she finished speaking.
As they continued northward, Lyessa walked beside him through drifting ash. You hate being thanked. No, then why do you look uncomfortable every time someone shows gratitude? Aldrich considered the question longer than expected. Because most people who thanked me are dead now. She had no answer for that.
By nightfall they reached the edge of the breach itself. The mountain had split apart into an enormous canyon glowing crimson from unimaginable depths below.
Fragments of ancient structures lined the cliffs around it, colossal ruins revealed by the destruction, statues larger than fortress towers depicting dragons kneeling beside hooded human figures.
Rivers of molten light flowed through cracks in the stone. The air hummed constantly with power strong enough to raise the hair along Lyessa's arms. At the center of the canyon, suspended above the abyss by enormous chains, stood a black gate half buried within the mountain itself.
Ancient symbols covered its surface. Some glowed silver.
Others pulsed crimson like infected wounds.
Selim stopped walking. That wasn't here before.
Aldrich's expression hardened.
Yes, it was.
The mountain merely hid it. Seraphine stared upward at the gate in disbelief.
That thing is the entrance to the well?
No, Aldrich replied. It's the lock. As if hearing the words, the Devourer King turned slowly toward them from farther down the canyon.
Even at that distance, its burning eyes focused directly on Aldrich.
The massive creature smiled.
Not kindly. Not mockingly. Hungrily.
Then it began climbing toward them.
Entire cliffs shattered beneath its claws. Veros swarmed after it like insects following a god.
Lyessa drew her sword instinctively despite knowing the weapon meant nothing against such a thing. Please tell me your plan involves more than walking calmly into certain death. Aldrich looked toward the chained gate.
The well responds to blood tied to it. Selim's face tightened immediately. No, you know it's true.
If we open that gate fully, it could worsen the breach.
Or it could give us enough power to seal it.
Seraphine stepped between the brothers sharply.
You're both insane.
Probably, Selim muttered.
The Devourer King roared again, closer now. Shockwaves ripped across the canyon.
Chains supporting the enormous gate rattled violently.
Aldrich stepped toward the abyss edge and extended one scarred hand toward the ancient lock.
Silver symbols ignited beneath his skin instantly, glowing up his arm like veins of living light. The mountain trembled in response.
Selim stared at him with growing dread. Aldrich, the gate began opening on its own. Slowly. Grinding against chains untouched for thousands of years.
Crimson light poured through the widening gap.
No. Not crimson. Silver.
Pure, blinding silver brighter than the storm above them. Lyessa shielded her eyes instinctively as wind erupted outward from inside the mountain carrying whispers in forgotten languages. The Devourer King stopped climbing.
For the first time since emerging from the breach, uncertainty crossed its colossal face.
Aldrich looked back toward the others while impossible light burned around him.
Once we enter, he said quietly, the well will judge us.
Then the gate opened fully. And something inside the mountain opened its eyes. The light pouring from beyond the gate did not behave like ordinary light.
It moved. It breathed.
Silver currents spiraled outward through the canyon carrying whispers that crawled beneath skin and memory alike, and the moment the gate fully opened every dragon across the mountains roared simultaneously, not in fear this time but recognition, their voices echoing through storm and fire as though answering an ancient summons older than language itself. Lyessa stood frozen at the edge of the abyss staring into the impossible radiance beyond the threshold while fragments of images flickered inside the light, oceans swallowing cities, forests growing across deserts in seconds, stars falling through black skies, countless faces appearing and vanishing before she could focus on any one of them. Her pulse hammered painfully. I can hear it, she whispered before realizing she had spoken aloud. Seraphine grabbed her shoulder immediately.
Don't listen too closely. It's speaking in my head.
Aldrich kept one hand pressed against the gate while silver symbols continued spreading across his skin like living fire.
The well doesn't use words. It uses memory. Selim stared into the opening with naked terror now. It remembers us.
The Devourer King resumed climbing toward them with renewed fury, molten claws tearing through entire cliff faces while Veros flooded upward behind it in endless numbers.
The canyon shook violently with every step it took.
We're out of time, Seraphine snapped.
Either go inside or run. Running stopped being an option. Hours ago, Lyessa said.
Aldrich finally stepped away from the gate and looked toward her carefully. Once you enter, the well will show you truths you may not survive.
You keep making that sound persuasive. I'm trying to make you understand.
She met his pale gaze without hesitation.
You walked into it once already. Something unreadable flickered across his expression. and I've regretted it every day since. Yet despite the warning, when he turned toward the opening, Lyessa followed immediately.
Selim cursed softly and came after them while Seraphine muttered, "I truly hate all of you," before entering last. The moment they crossed the threshold, the world vanished.
No sensation of movement.
No tunnel or staircase. One instant they stood in the shattered mountains of Avalon, the next they drifted through endless silver darkness beneath a sky filled with unfamiliar constellations. Vast roots larger than kingdoms stretched through the void around them, glowing faintly beneath translucent bark. Rivers of light flowed through those roots like blood through veins. Lyessa realized with growing awe that they stood not inside a place but inside something alive. "Gods," she whispered. Aldrich looked upward at the enormous roots disappearing into infinity. The Well of Avalon. Sound behaved strangely here. Their voices echoed twice, once normally and once softer, delayed by several seconds as though the void itself repeated them. Selim walked slowly away from the others, staring at his own hands while silver reflections moved beneath his skin. "It's stronger than before," he murmured. "Or we are weaker," Seraphine answered. The ground beneath them resembled smooth black glass reflecting fragments of memories instead of reflections. Lyessa glanced downward and briefly saw herself as a child training with wooden swords beside her father in the palace gardens before the image dissolved. Seraphine looked away sharply from whatever memory surfaced beneath her feet. Aldrich alone ignored the visions entirely, focused instead on the distant center of the void where a colossal tree rose upward beyond sight, its silver branches supporting entire galaxies of glowing leaves. "We need to reach the heart root," he said. Selim laughed nervously. "You remember the path?" "No one remembers the path." "Then how do we?" the well answered before he finished. The ground shifted beneath them silently and a narrow bridge of silver stone unfolded through the void leading toward the colossal tree. Far below the bridge moved shadows too large to comprehend fully. Lyessa chose not to stare at them. They began walking. Time lost meaning almost immediately. Sometimes the bridge stretched endlessly beneath dark skies filled with strange moons. Other times entire landscapes formed around them briefly only to dissolve again into silver emptiness. They crossed forests where every leaf whispered forgotten names. They passed ruined cities floating upside down through the void, their broken towers inhabited by pale ghost-like figures who watched silently from shattered windows. Once Lyessa heard music drifting from somewhere unseen, unbearably beautiful and sad enough to make her chest ache. Seraphine stopped walking entirely until Aldrich grabbed her arm and pulled her forward. "Don't follow the songs," he warned. "What happens if you do?" Lyessa asked quietly. Selim answered without looking back. "You become part of the well." Eventually the bridge brought them to a vast circular platform suspended beneath the roots of the colossal tree. At its center stood 4 stone figures surrounding a pool of perfectly still silver water. Human figures. Or once human. Their bodies had petrified into marble-like statues frozen in expressions of agony and wonder intertwined. Lyessa approached cautiously. "Who are they?" Aldrich's voice lowered. "The first mages." Selim circled one statue slowly. "No," he corrected quietly. "The first survivors." The pool suddenly rippled, though nothing touched it. Then reflections appeared across its surface, not of the people standing beside it but scenes unfolding elsewhere in the world. Avalon burning. Dragons falling from crimson skies. The Devourer King advancing toward the capital while armies collapsed before it like leaves before wildfire. Lyessa stepped closer in horror. The battle's getting worse. Aldrich studied the visions grimly. The breach is widening faster than expected. Another image surfaced. King Edric standing atop Caer Iden's walls surrounded by exhausted soldiers while Veros swarmed through the streets below. The old king still fought despite blood soaking his armor. Lyessa clenched her jaw. "My father's still alive." Then the pool changed again. This time the reflection showed a child wandering alone through burning ruins somewhere in the capital, clutching a wooden toy sword while crimson crystal spread across nearby buildings. Aldrich's expression shifted instantly. No, before anyone could react, he thrust his hand into the silver water. The entire platform shook violently,
Lyessa grabbed his arm. What are you doing? The well allows influence through memory. That sentence means nothing.
Aldrich ignored her and closed his eyes. Silver light erupted around his arm, flowing outward through the pool itself. In the vision below, the lost child suddenly stopped beside a collapsed alley as falling debris crashed where he would have walked moments later. Then a city guard spotted him and pulled him toward safety. Aldrich withdrew his hand sharply, breathing harder now. Blood trickled from his nose.
You can affect the real world from here? Seraphine asked.
Only slightly, he muttered.
Selim stared at the pool with growing fascination.
But enough to change outcomes.
Aldrich looked at him immediately. Don't. Imagine what this power could do.
That thinking created the breach.
Selim stepped toward the silver water anyway. No. Fear created the breach. Fear of what humanity could become. Aldrich moved between him and the pool. You still don't understand. Then explain it.
Selim exploded suddenly, years of bitterness erupting all at once. All my life I stood behind you while masters praised your restraint and warned against my ambition.
Yet every kingdom in history was built by ambitious men. And destroyed by them too.
At least they changed the world.
Aldrich's voice hardened.
The world is not broken merely because it refuses to kneel before your desires.
Silence crashed between them.
Selim's hands trembled with shadow magic.
You always thought you were better than me.
No, Aldrich said quietly.
I thought you were stronger.
The words hit harder than shouting.
Selim froze.
Even Seraphine looked surprised.
Aldrich stepped closer to his brother now, voice lower. That's why I brought you to the temple years ago. I believed you could survive the well better than anyone. Selim's expression cracked slightly beneath the anger. Then why did you leave me there? For the first time since entering the well, Aldrich looked genuinely shaken.
Because when the well touched you, he stopped. The silver roots above them pulsed brighter.
Lyessa sensed the entire void listening. Selim stared at his brother with growing dread. What did you see? Aldrich answered slowly.
You begged me to kill you.
No one moved. Selim's face drained of color. Fragments of memory seemed to surface behind his eyes.
No, he whispered.
I would remember that.
The well erased parts of what happened, Aldrich said.
From both of us.
Seraphine suddenly looked toward the darkness beyond the platform.
We're not alone. Shapes moved between the distant roots now. Tall figures approaching silently through silver fog.
At first Lyessa thought they were Veros, but as they stepped closer she realized with horror that each figure wore familiar faces.
People from their memories. A woman Lyessa.
Recognized as her dead mother. A scarred warrior who made Seraphine visibly flinch.
An elderly mage Aldrich stared at with open disbelief. The figures stopped at the platform edge smiling softly. Lyessa's mother stepped forward first.
My daughter, she said gently.
You've carried enough pain.
Lyessa's breath caught despite herself.
Mother? Aldrich grabbed her arm immediately. They are not real.
Yet even he sounded uncertain while staring at the old mage before him. Selim took one step toward another approaching figure, a young boy perhaps 12 years old with the same pale eyes as the brothers. Tomas, he whispered. The child smiled sadly.
You left me in the fire. Seraphine drew a dagger. The well's testing us.
No, Aldrich said quietly.
It's feeding.
Then every false figure opened their mouths at once and screamed.
The sound shattered the platform beneath their feet. The silver pool exploded upward into towering waves of light.
And from somewhere deep beneath the roots of the well, something ancient began waking.
The scream of the false figures did not sound human once it fully emerged. It began with familiar voices, mothers, brothers, teachers, lovers, but twisted within seconds into something layered and monstrous, thousands of cries folding together until the sound became a living force that cracked the silver platform beneath their feet and sent fractures racing outward across the black glass surface of the void. Lyessa staggered backward, covering her ears while blood streamed from her fingertips where her nails dug into her palms. Around them the false faces melted. Her mother's image dissolved first, skin splitting apart into streams of silver ash that swirled upward and formed hollow-eyed creatures made entirely of shifting memory. Seraphine slashed through one with her dagger, but the blade passed harmlessly through its body. "They aren't physical," she shouted. Aldrich stepped forward, silver runes igniting around his arms. "No," he said grimly. "They're reflections." One of the creatures lunged toward Selim wearing the face of the young boy called Tomas. "You promised you'd save me," it whispered. Selim froze. The hesitation nearly killed him. The creature struck his chest and shadow magic exploded violently around him as memories tore loose from his mind like pages ripped from a book. Lyessa saw fragments flash briefly through the air around him, a village burning under moonlight, Selim kneeling beside the body of a child, Aldrich shouting through collapsing ruins. Then the visions shattered. Selim screamed and dropped to one knee, clutching his head. Aldrich moved instantly, slamming one glowing hand against his brother's chest. "Look at me," he shouted. Silver light surged outward, forcing the creature backward. "The well uses guilt against you. If you drown in the memory, it consumes you." Selim's eyes refocused slowly through visible agony. Easy advice from the brother everyone remembers as the hero. Aldrich's expression darkened. "You think memory spared me?" The void around them answered before Selim could. Another reflection emerged from the silver fog. This one wore the face of a young woman with dark hair braided in gold thread and gentle eyes full of unbearable disappointment. Aldrich stopped moving entirely. Seraphine noticed immediately. "Aldrich," she warned quietly. The woman approached him slowly. "You said you would come back." Aldrich's breathing changed. Lyessa watched in silence as cracks appeared in the cold composure he carried everywhere like armor. "Mira," he whispered. The reflection smiled sadly. "You always sounded surprised when you said my name." Selim looked toward the figure with visible shock. "I thought she died before the rebellion." "She did," Aldrich said quietly. The false Mira stepped closer until only inches separated them. "No," she whispered. "I died because of you." The silver void darkened instantly around Aldrich. Shadows spread beneath his feet. Lyessa felt the entire well reacting to his pain. "Aldrich," she said carefully. "It's not real." But the reflection continued, speaking with terrifying precision. "You taught kings how to kill. You awakened powers no human should touch. Everywhere you walk, graves follow." Aldrich closed his eyes briefly as though every word struck a wound already open long ago. Then, to Lyessa's surprise, he nodded once. "Yes," he said softly. "They do." The reflection faltered. Just slightly. Aldrich opened his eyes again, and for the first time since entering the well his voice carried neither anger nor denial. Only exhaustion. "I failed you," he admitted. "I failed many people." The creature wearing Myra's face stepped backward uncertainly. The well itself seemed to recoil from the response. Aldrich continued quietly. "But regret is not ownership. Your death belongs to the men who murdered you, not the man who survived." Silver light erupted outward from him in a calm wave. The reflection shattered instantly into drifting ash. Around the platform several other memory creatures flickered violently. Seraphine stared at Aldrich with open surprise. "You resisted it." "No," he answered. "I stopped lying to myself." Before anyone could respond, the platform beneath them lurched violently. The colossal roots above began moving. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed as enormous silver branches shifted through the void like living continents. Far below them something rose from the darkness beneath the well itself. Not fully visible. Only fragments. An eye-opening larger than mountains. Claws dragging across impossible depths.
The ancient presence awakening below the roots made the Devourer King feel suddenly small by comparison. Lyessa felt it looking upward toward them.
Not at their bodies. At their souls.
"What is that?" she whispered. Aldrich's face went pale in a way she had never seen before.
The Keeper. Selim stared into the abyss beneath the platform. I thought it was a myth. Most things in Avalon begin as myths, Seraphine muttered uneasily.
The silver pool at the platform's center rose upward now, floating into the air as a perfect sphere of liquid light. Within it scenes from Avalon flashed rapidly.
Dragons dying. Cities burning.
The Devourer King reaching the outer plains beyond the mountains. Then the sphere stopped shifting and focused on a single image, King Edric standing alone atop the shattered walls of Caer Iden while crimson storms swallowed the city behind him. The old king leaned heavily on his sword. Around him every soldier had fallen. Varos climbed the walls in endless waves.
Lyessa stepped toward the vision instinctively.
"Father," the king looked upward suddenly, directly toward the sphere, as though sensing her presence across impossible distance. Blood covered half his face. Yet when he spoke, his voice emerged clearly within the well itself.
You always hated crowns, he said weakly. Lyessa's breath caught. He can see us? No, Aldrich said. The well is connecting memory and present. Edric smiled faintly through exhaustion. Good, he murmured. Means I'm finally going mad.
Then a Varos lunged from the smoke behind him. The old king turned instantly and drove his sword through its skull before the creature reached him. Even exhausted, even dying, he still fought like a king.
Lyessa clenched her jaw hard enough to hurt. We have to hurry.
The sphere shifted again. Now it showed the Devourer King approaching the capital itself.
Dragons swarmed around the colossal creature like sparks around a volcano, attacking desperately, but the Titan tore through them with horrifying ease.
One silver dragon was caught mid-flight and ripped apart in a spray of fire and blood.
Another vanished beneath a single sweep of the giant's molten arm. Selim stared at the vision in growing horror. Nothing can stop that.
Something stopped it before, Aldrich replied.
The roots above them suddenly glowed brighter.
Then a voice echoed through the well itself.
Ancient. Vast. Neither male nor female. Blood of Avalon.
The words vibrated through the void and inside their bones simultaneously.
The silver sphere descended slowly toward Aldrich and Selim. The gate weakens. Selim looked around uneasily. Who said that?
The voice answered from everywhere at once.
The world remembers your touch.
The abyss below shifted again.
The enormous unseen presence beneath the roots moved closer.
Lyessa saw fragments now, scales of silver stone, eyes filled with galaxies instead of fire, antlers woven from living branches.
The Keeper. State your will, the voice commanded. Aldrich stepped forward first. Seal the breach. Selim hesitated. The well seemed to notice instantly. Your heart divides. Selim looked toward the visions of Avalon burning.
I wanted power to change the world, he said quietly.
I thought strength would free humanity from fear.
The voice rumbled through the void.
And what do you desire now? Selim's gaze dropped. To undo what I've done. Silence followed. The well pulsed softly around them. Then the voice spoke again. Redemption and ruin grow from the same root.
Seraphine folded her arms tightly.
Wonderful. The ancient cosmic force speaks in riddles. Lyessa ignored her. Can the breach be closed or not?
The silver sphere floated between the brothers now.
A gate opened by blood may be sealed by blood. Aldrich understood immediately. A sacrifice. Balance. Selim laughed bitterly. Of course. Lyessa stepped between them sharply. No, Aldrich looked at her calmly. You already knew this would cost something. Not one of you. That isn't your decision. Anger flared across her face. You think I crossed a collapsing kingdom to watch you throw yourselves into oblivion? Aldrich's voice softened unexpectedly.
Lyessa, no, she pointed toward the burning visions in the sphere. You don't get to save everyone by dying while the rest of us live with it.
Silence followed. Even the well seemed to still itself around them. Selim watched the exchange carefully, then looked at his brother for a long moment before speaking quietly. She cares about you. Aldrich looked away first. Irrelevant. You always say that before something terrifies you. Before Aldrich could answer, the entire void convulsed violently. Cracks spread across the black glass beneath them.
The silver roots above twisted sharply. Then, from somewhere far beyond the platform, a roar thundered through the well itself. Not the Devourer King.
Something else had entered.
Seraphine drew her blades immediately.
Tell me that thing can't reach us in here.
The silver sphere flashed wildly. The vision shifted again. This time they saw the mountain gate in the real world. And standing within it was the Devourer King itself, forcing its colossal body through the opening into the well. The keeper's voice deepened with sudden fury. The Devourer enters the roots.
Aldrich's expression hardened instantly. Then we're out of time.
Far across the silver void, massive shadows began moving between the glowing roots toward them. The well trembled with every approaching step. And for the first time since entering that impossible place, the keeper itself began rising from the abyss below. The rise of the keeper changed the well itself. The silver void darkened as though eclipsed by an unseen moon, and the colossal roots stretching through infinity began pulsing like the veins of a living world preparing for battle. Across the endless distance came the sound of chains dragging over stone, slow and impossibly heavy, while the black glass beneath their feet cracked further with each approaching step from the Devourer King forcing its way into the roots of the well. Lyessa gripped her sword despite knowing steel meant little here.
Instinct mattered more than logic now. Survival itself felt ancient and primal inside this place.
Then the keeper emerged. It rose from the abyss beneath the platform without haste, and the deeper truth of its form became visible piece by piece through drifting silver storms.
Its body resembled a dragon only in the loosest sense. Vast antlers of crystalline branches spread wider than cities.
Silver scales reflected not light but memories, scenes flickering across them constantly, births, wars, kingdoms rising and falling.
Its eyes contained entire skies swirling behind translucent pupils.
Beneath its chest hung broken chains carved with the same runes covering the mountain gate outside.
The creature's sheer presence bent the void around it.
Seraphine stared upward openly speechless for the first time since meeting them. That guarded the well, she whispered.
Aldrich's expression remained grim. No. That is the well.
The keeper lowered its enormous head toward the platform.
When it spoke, its voice emerged inside there. Thoughts rather than the air itself. Children of fleeting kingdoms.
Selim swallowed hard but forced himself to stand straighter. You could have stopped this before the breach opened. The keeper's gaze shifted toward him slowly.
Would you silence fire by destroying every spark? That answer means nothing.
It means choice births consequence. The well trembled violently. Far across the roots, crimson light spread through the silver void as the Devourer King advanced closer.
Entire roots snapped beneath its weight.
Behind it swarmed endless Veros climbing through the inner pathways of the well itself. The keeper's attention shifted toward the spreading corruption.
The ancient hunger returns. Lyessa stepped forward before fear could stop her. Can you destroy it?
The keeper looked at her with impossible age behind its gaze.
Can the ocean destroy the storm?
That sounds like another useless riddle. To her surprise, the massive being lowered its head slightly, almost studying her.
You speak with defiance rather than worship.
Rare. I'm tired of ancient creatures speaking in circles while my kingdom burns.
A pause followed.
Then something unexpected flickered through the keeper's vast expression.
Amusement. You carry the will of old queens. Aldrich stepped beside Lyessa now. Enough riddles.
Tell us how to seal the breach. The keeper's eyes settled upon the brothers together.
Two touched the source. Two opened the wound. Selim exhaled sharply. And now two must close it. Not close. The keeper's antlers glowed brighter. Contain.
The silver sphere floating above the platform expanded suddenly, surrounding the brothers in rings of shifting light. Images burst around them in rapid succession.
Aldrich standing before armies during forgotten wars. Selim studying forbidden texts alone by candlelight.
The two of them as children racing through palace gardens beneath summer rain.
Lyessa saw tenderness between them once. Genuine brotherhood.
Then the images darkened.
Fire. Screaming.
The temple beneath the desert.
A vast silver ocean of light.
Selim reaching toward it with awe while Aldrich shouted in terror. The memories accelerated faster. Lyessa saw another figure there too, a young boy around 12 years old trapped beneath falling stone.
Tomas. Selim turned toward him instead of fleeing. Then the well erupted.
The vision shattered apart.
Selim staggered backward, breathing hard. Stop. The keeper ignored him. More memories surfaced.
Aldrich dragging Selim through collapsing ruins while silver fire consumed the temple around them. Selim clawing at his own face, screaming for death.
Aldrich refusing. Lyessa finally understood.
You didn't abandon him, she whispered.
Aldrich looked away. I should have.
Selim's expression twisted with old pain.
You think saving me was mercy? No, Aldrich answered quietly. I think it was selfishness. Silence fell between the brothers.
Even the well seemed to hold itself still around them.
Then a massive impact shook the void.
One of the distant roots exploded apart in a storm of crimson crystal. The Devourer King emerged through the wreckage fully now inside the well, larger and more terrible than before. Within the silver void its body no longer resembled stone and magma but living darkness wrapped around a skeletal frame of burning stars. Entire roots withered where its claws touched them. Behind it, Veros flooded through the ruptured pathways like blood spilling through open veins.
The keeper's immense body coiled upward protectively around the platform. The hunger remembers its enemy, it thundered.
The Devourer King lifted its head toward the keeper and smiled with a mouth full of collapsing galaxies. When it spoke, the well itself recoiled. Old jailer. The voice sounded ancient beyond measure, layered with countless souls speaking at once. The keeper's antlers blazed silver. You were bound before mountains learned their names. And now I rise while your roots rot. The Devourer King's gaze shifted toward Aldrich and Selim. Children touched the gate.
Children broke the chain. Selim stepped backward instinctively beneath that impossible attention. Aldrich moved in front of him immediately.
The Devourer laughed softly.
Still protecting him.
Still hiding behind monsters, Aldrich replied coldly. Crimson storms erupted around the Devourer King.
You carry my mark, little mage. Lyessa looked sharply toward Aldrich. What does that mean?
The keeper answered before he could. When the well was breached long ago, fragments of the hunger remained within those who survived. Seraphine's face hardened instantly.
You're saying the Devourer exists partly inside them? The keeper's silence confirmed it.
Selim stared at his hands in horror as faint crimson cracks appeared beneath his skin.
No, Aldrich looked unsurprised. I wondered when it would awaken fully. You knew? Lyessa demanded. Not completely. Aldrich's own arm now glowed with intertwined silver and crimson light beneath the skin.
The well changed us both differently.
The Devourer King spread its colossal arms. You are my doorway.
Veros swarmed closer across the roots. Dragons suddenly burst from the silver void above them, diving through the well itself in blazing streams of fire.
Avalon's guardians had followed the breach inside.
A bronze dragon collided with a cluster of Veros near the platform while silver flames exploded across the roots.
Another dragon seized a molten creature in its jaws and vanished into the darkness below. The battle for the well had begun. Seraphine drew both chain blades. Finally, something I understand.
She charged toward the nearest Veros without waiting.
Lyessa followed immediately, sword flashing silver in the light of the roots.
Steel still could not kill the Veros fully, but inside the well their forms became unstable.
Every strike disrupted them briefly.
Aldrich turned toward the keeper. "Tell us how to contain the devourer." The ancient being's eyes focused on the brothers.
"The hunger entered your blood. One must become the seal." Selim let out a hollow laugh. "There it is." Lyessa cut down a half-formed Veros nearby and shouted back toward them. "Find another solution." "There isn't one," Aldrich said. The Devourer King moved closer, enormous claws ripping through roots as it advanced.
Everywhere it stepped, silver light blackened into corruption.
"Choose quickly," it whispered. "I remember worlds sweeter than yours." Selim looked toward the visions still swirling inside the silver sphere. Tomas. The burning village.
His years chasing power.
Then Avalon dying because of him. Slowly, he straightened. "I opened the gate," he said quietly. "I close it." Aldrich stepped toward him instantly. "No, you know it has to be me."
"You are not sacrificing yourself because of guilt."
Selim actually smiled then, tired and sad. "Listen to you. Pretending this isn't exactly what you planned for yourself." Aldrich fell silent. Lyessa heard it too.
The truth hidden beneath his calm acceptance from the beginning.
Selim looked toward her next. He was always going to do this.
Anger flashed across her face as she turned toward Aldrich.
"Tell me he's wrong." Aldrich did not answer. The silence hurt worse than confirmation. The Devourer King roared and surged forward suddenly.
The keeper collided with it in a cataclysm of silver and crimson force that shattered roots across the void.
Entire sections of the well collapsed into darkness. Dragons screamed overhead while Veros poured onto the platform itself.
Seraphine was hurled backward through exploding crystal. Lyessa barely blocked a Veros strike before another creature slammed into her side hard enough to crack armor.
Chaos consumed the platform. Selim grabbed Aldrich's arm amid the destruction.
"For once in your life," he shouted over the roaring void, "stop trying to carry everything alone." Then he drove both hands into the silver sphere at the platform's center.
The well exploded with light.
Selim screamed as crimson energy tore from his body in burning streams. The Devourer King froze mid-battle. Its burning eyes widened with sudden fury.
No, Aldrich lunged forward instantly. "Selim."
But the sphere had already engulfed his brother completely.
Memories erupted outward through the void. Two boys laughing beneath summer rain. Brothers studying magic together by candlelight.
Selim carrying a dying child from burning ruins while soldiers fled around him. All the pieces of him buried beneath ambition and resentment.
Lyessa saw Aldrich stop as the memories flooded through the well. Not because he lacked power to intervene. Because he finally understood something.
Selim looked at him through the silver light now consuming his body.
"You once asked why I envied you," he said softly.
"It wasn't your power."
The platform shook violently.
The Devourer King screamed again, this time in genuine fear. Selim smiled faintly through tears burning silver down his face.
"It was that no matter how broken the world became, you still loved it."
Then the well swallowed him whole.
And the roots of creation itself ignited.
The moment Selim vanished into the heart of the well, every root across the infinite void erupted with blinding silver fire, and the shockwave that followed tore through existence itself. Lyessa was thrown backward across the collapsing platform hard enough to lose breath entirely while Veros around her disintegrated into ash before they even struck the ground.
Dragons spiraled through the void screaming as the well awakened fully beneath them.
The Devourer King roared in fury and pain, crimson cracks splitting wider across its colossal body while the silver flames raced along every root it touched like judgment itself spreading through ancient veins.